Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and I'm very happy to welcome you to today's user share. I hope this April Fool's Day is treating you well and not badly. But before we get into everything, just want to go over a couple of details. Got some events coming up that you might be interested in. Let me put this in the chat for you really quickly. There's a link for you in the chat to our events calendar. We've got lots of meetings. April is a super busy month for us, and that's really exciting. We have a lot of webinars, lots of meetings, and of course, another Excel event. So hopefully you guys can check that stuff out and get registered. Love to see you virtually and eventually one day in person, of course. So definitely check all that stuff out. And today we are recording this presentation, so don't worry about that. You will get a link to the recording tomorrow. It's going to come from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. Also, we want you to submit your questions at any time. Just put them in the question panel, and we'll keep an eye on those. And I think Steve and Joe will take them as they can. So put them in as you have them. And then finally, stick around to the end because we're going to give away some CUGC swag. If you haven't had a chance to win any yet, now's your chance. So just stick around after everything's done and we'll give you an opportunity to win. I'm going to give away 3 items from the CUGC store. So stay around for that. All right, so I am about to turn things over to Steve and Joe. If you don't know them, Steve Greenberg is a CTP fellow and Joe Shonk is a CTP, and both of them are involved in the Phoenix CUGC group, very heavily involved and have been presenting a ton for CUGC, and we love all of the involvement that they have with us and all of the support, and just happy to have them here with us today. So I'm going to hand things directly over to you guys. Joe, I think you get the screen, so I'm going to send that to you now. It is, sorry, lots of clicks. All right, coming to you. You should have it.
All right. Are you able to see the screen?
Yep.
All righty. Well, thank you for joining this presentation. The topic of automation has kind of been heating up quite a bit over the last year or so, especially where people start moving and migrating towards more cloud infrastructure, more cloud deployments. And so before we get into this presentation, I want to introduce my partner in crime here, Mr. Stephen Greenberg, owner and CEO of Thin Client Computing. Steve and I have been working together for this time around the last, 17 years now? 17, 18 years? Been quite some time. So Steve's going to help drive this presentation today.
Great, Joe. Great to be here. We're welcoming you to BRI Forum, April 23rd here, 2007. We're excited to be at Navy Pier and to be presenting with you with all the latest technology in Citrix and desktop virtualization. And I want to introduce Joe Shonk. He's an expert in integration and Citrix, storage and networking, and really has tremendous skills in the latest Windows operating systems like Windows 2003. And he's even been beta testing the new one that I don't think's been named yet, but we expect to come out in 2008. There's some exciting developments there, and we're happy to come and share about automating installations of these environments and see all the latest technology as of 2007.
All right, so this presentation is actually a two-parter, right? So in this particular hour, we're going to cover part 1, and we'll schedule another meeting down the road to cover part 2 of this. But the idea behind automation is, okay. So like I was saying earlier, automation is starting to become a hot topic again. especially as we start moving towards cloud services and whatnot. So this presentation, we're going to cover a few various topics and get a little bit detailed into how you can deploy a framework and how you can start automating your server builds and your RDS implementation. And so in this presentation, we're going to discuss why every administrator and engineer should learn how to script, right? I think it's one of the basic fundamental scripts that every administrator should learn how to use, how to do. We're going to go over the different types of installers, different types of application deployments, products. We're going to develop how to develop a methodology and approach, right? So are you going to use Visual Basic? Are you going to use command scripts? How are you going to package up, repackage your application so that you can automate them? We'll go over some scripting best practices, and then we'll go into how to troubleshoot and pinpoint some of those problems. And then I'll show you a couple of my command line scripts that I built for my framework that you can start dissecting and kind of adopting and make it your own. So if you wanted to do your own version of Office 2003, you can do Office 2003. If you have a special deployment for Windows 2003 and you want to add on the resource kit, you can do that as well. So I'll give you the ability to create your own little packages inside this framework to do the deployments. So what I think every administrator should learn how to script. So things can be done manually. We all learn how to sit there and play around with the GUI. I remember a story where we had a new administrator come in, and I sat him down, and he didn't know how to script at all. All he learned how to do was, do the GUI, the click and point and click, point and click. But that can take time, and that introduces human error, right? And also it's repetitive tasks, right? I don't know about you, but I kind of take this lazy approach where if I got to do something over and over, why am I doing this thing over and over? Is there a better way I can just script it and be done with it? Another thing that you also have to consider is the different approaches for application installations. You have executables, you have MSIs, transform files you have to take into account. If you're doing this on server-based computing with Presentation 4.0 or even just terminal services, you have to worry about things like shadow keys every time, right? You got to do that change user install, make your changes, and then back out. Well, what if you screw up, right? And you don't know where in that shadow keys that is capturing that stuff. We run into many installations where somebody accidentally captured too much, they get stored in the shadow keys, they don't know how to clear those out or rebuild them, and you're spending days troubleshooting some of these things. Like I said, we reduce manual repetitive tasks. I think scripts ensure that applications are installed and configured in a specific manner, right? So once you have a tried and true way of deploying an application, you want to make sure you forget that. So 6 months down the road, you don't forget that, oh, I had to modify this INI file. A script can be flexible and adaptable. So as the application change, so can the scripts, and the installation process can move along with that. You don't have to necessarily keep changing. Keep trying to learn how the UI works. So with this presentation, we're going to cover the different approaches. Well, we can do a manual installation and what's the pros and cons for that. Imaging, so something like SMS, Microsoft SMS 2003, IM, and even Active Directory, Altiris. We can do package deployments with Symantec, with AppV. Or we can even take a hybrid approach where we do an image, we take a base image, we push it out, and then we do a bunch of scripted installations. So give me a second here.
Getting some comments in the chat that are great. Um, People talking about can't wait to finally get off NT4. I can't agree more.
Well, NT4 was a great operating system. 2000 was okay, and then 2003 kind of, the current. Okay, so let's go ahead.
Debate that Novell is still better, but that's going to be ongoing for a few years.
Okay, so let's just get to the real presentation here. So it was kind of fun doing that.
Joe, let me just jump in a second and just say April Fool's Day. I think people obviously picked up in the chat that we were making a joke here, but this is the real presentation from 2007, and it is on the same subject. And we've got some people in the chat who were actually there, so it's really fun to hear from them, like Jim Moyle and Eric. And there's an important point to that really the benefits have shifted and changed with cloud, but this many years later, the purpose and the points really do stay the same. So thanks for sharing that old presentation, Joe. We did a lot of events back at Bryforum in the day. They were a lot of fun. Joe and I co-presented a lot of things, but so happy April Fool's Day. And we're going to switch to the modern times, and you'll be amazed at the so much of the data really is the same. So go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. I was going to say the irony of the framework that I had created back in those days. It's still functional. It'll still work today if somebody really wanted to take it and run with it. It's nothing more than command line files and batch files and VB scripts, right? This is kind of precursor to the PowerShell days, where we got a lot more functionality and flexibility out of it. But it's just basic. You put your stuff up on an SMB share, and you wrote a few wrapper scripts to do the installation. You wrote a wrapper script to do some validation, so that at the end of the run, you could run a validation script against everything, make sure everything installed properly. The INI files and registry settings were put in the right locations, and so forth like that. Now, some of that stuff, obviously it changed over the year, but the framework itself really didn't have to change, because the logic is what you would have written into each of the modules for installing. It's not much different between installing Office 2003 as you would with Office 365. Now there's some different things on the back end with how the products are registered and so forth like that, but that's after the fact, right? After the automation bits and pieces have installed. And so, like I said in the previous bit, the reason that got in automation was to kind of reduce the human error factor, and also, to be honest, be a little bit lazy. And not lazy that I don't want to do any work, but lazy I just don't want to do the same thing over and over again. I'm not what you would call a task worker. I want to solve problems, and making things that are repetitive and automating and solving a problem to me. So that's kind of why I got into automation.
Joe, let me interject there for a second. Justin's on, and he's saying automate anything and everything makes for a happy admin. And I have to agree. And I think the idea that laziness is the driver for a lot of great things is definitely true. Who wants to do the same repetitive tasks over and over? And people like us will happily take way extra time to automate something than do it manually, because you don't want to do it again. And there's a funny mindset around this, which is you'll work really, really, really hard to be lazy. And it's funny, and it's kind of a paradox, but it's true. It really drives here. And it's an important point that it's good to be able to structure and automate. And whether it's 17 years ago or today, those principles are the same, but now they're driving as necessities when we go into cloud, because so much is inherently API driven, and so much is based on the platform of the provider. It's not really how you choose to do it anymore, it's how the platform works. And that's why this becomes so important. But thanks, Joe. I just wanted to add Justin's comment. I thought you get a kick out of that.
Oh, thank you, Steve. so another bit to that is not just the not wanting to do repetitive tasks, but just even trying to remember what you did a couple days ago, last week, or a couple months down the road when you built that master image. You may have documented as much as you could, but then you got to rebuild that image for one reason or another, or create a new one. And you forgot to document half the stuff that's in there, or you forgot what you did. It's happened way too often. That you build something and then you need to rebuild it later on, and you don't remember how you built it the first time around. And so that's that human error aspect of it, or the human element to IT that can be a downfall. And so we did this project. We actually took this framework, Steve and I, and we deployed it at quite a few customers. And we had a lot of success with it, right? It worked well and integrated well. But over time, we started noticing a few patterns. And a couple of those patterns were things like the framework wasn't being updated. So as they were doing patches, or application updates, stuff like that, those didn't get incorporated back into the framework and redeployed. They would just, the admin was too busy. They would take that Kiwi patch and then they would patch, install Service Pack 2 on all the servers. And the next thing you know, they forgot about it and didn't put it back in the framework. So when you go back in 6 months later and rebuild the image, you're spending a couple days trying to remediate the original, your original scripted install with what the current state is, and trying to remediate that. It also happens a lot when doing troubleshooting too. We get troubleshooting issues and you're tweaking the registry of a server and trying to get the ISA client to work, a certain way with pass-through or something like that, and you need to make server-based changes. Well, those got changed on some servers, and you get the problem with server drift, which is one thing that automation can help alleviate, right? But you would get not only server drift, but you get configuration changes that obviously didn't get put back into the deployment script. So if you wanted to redeploy a fresh image, then you couldn't do it.
Hey, Joe, let me insert a comment. This is a good moment to insert a comment from Jose. He says, it may be my lack of experience, but I still walk a line on fully trusting things I've automated. Throw in a bunch of logging and email recaps for some peace of mind. And I think that's a really good point, and that may be part of why back in the day it wasn't as widely adopted. We have like Jim Moyle on who's watching, who says, he used that framework, he came to your session, but it did challenge people to think differently. I think today you're going to have to, and we'll talk about that. But what do you think, Joe, about trusting automation for somebody who's newer?
Trust. I mean, when you say trust, what I want to think about is trusting the source of where I'm getting the binaries and stuff from, right? So we talk about something like a Chocolatey or a NuGet or some other ever-ready type application deployment where you're just going out to the vendor's website, grabbing the binaries, the latest version of the binaries, and doing the installation there. How do you know that something wasn't injected into that? And it kind of goes back to that whole SolarWinds issue where, nefarious code got injected into actual production binaries and distributed from a reputable
really
company.
Interesting response, because in 2007, I think we would have said, oh, just do logging and notification, test your work. But now when you say trust in 2021, it's a whole different meaning. You can be injecting malicious code with having no idea you've done that, and you're getting it from the source. That's really interesting.
So what we did back in the day is that we had that validation script that would actually go through and validate that the installations did what it was supposed to do. Your keys and your registry settings, all your INI files, anything that you wanted to check would put in place. So if something bended or blew up during the installation, you would be able to run the report and see that that particular product failed the installation process. Now, for the new paradigm, we'll get to that in a minute on how can we automate our builds and then move that build from what we traditionally call test dev, dev, test, QA, prod, into more of a modern approach, and Canary, those images, those builds into production. But you still have to have a way to test and a way to validate that you have a good image before you present it to an end user.
Very good.
Yeah. Kind of getting back to the question, not the question, but the original thought is, why did it fail? And it's because the automation framework needed to be continuously updated, right? You still needed to do a lot of work with it to keep up to date with new packages, and then you also had to download and repackage some applications in some cases, right? And the sad thing was that Ron Popeil did wonders for the chicken rotisserie industry, but he really didn't make his way into the IT space. So it's not we don't really have a set it and forget it type framework that we can work with here, right? You still have to give it some love and attention. But again, you're not doing repetitive tasks over and over again. The other thing that we kind of focused on that kind of got away from during the framework was the two other things, right? One was customers really wanted knowledge transfer. They really wanted to know and understand the next process of installing the delivery controller, or installing a web interface, or a secure gateway, or a storefront server, right? So they wanted to see everything next, and you do that a couple times at one customer, you already have the infrastructure built and ready to go. There's no point in automating that piece of it. Same thing with image, but not only with the image, we started moving towards the app V adoption, right? Where we could build a single master image that we could run 400 or 500 applications on that one image, right? And we used app V primarily to make that one image, dream possible. And so you didn't need to automate the master image installation, because you just kind of streamed, so that you just repackage the apps and stream them on demand. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
And so, over time, it just kind of fell by the wayside, and it's kind of stopped doing the automation. But now that I think the tides have started to change again, where admins are being asked to do a lot, and you don't have the luxury of just logging into every Windows server and doing a manual Windows update, right? You have to use some kind of tool to automate your Windows update schedule every month, right? Repackaging of applications. So you have people that do like AppLane and AppV and stuff like that. They're great tools. However, they require you to do some sort of repackaging. And when you start looking at image updates, it's now been like you do an image update once a month because Microsoft does patching once a month, but you can't really do it once a month anymore, because you have these evergreen applications like Microsoft Edge and OneDrive and Chrome, Firefox, a number of applications that have a release cadence of 4 to 6 weeks. So not all on the same schedule. And, every vendor has a different schedule when they want to do their releases. You've got Google, who just changed the Chrome cadence from 6 weeks to 4 weeks. So, and I personally have experienced this, where if I'm not on the latest version of Chrome, I can't log into my banking application. My banking application is checking to see what version of Chrome I'm using. And if I'm on the previous version of Chrome, it will not let me log in. And so you're finding that these applications need to be continuously updated. And so you can log in, and you got to go find all these applications and then do the updates every month.
That sounds good, Joe. And people are mentioning how much they liked AppV and some of these older approaches. There definitely
Yeah,
been some
Appy was
great,
great,
yeah, there
except
definitely,
5.0 had issues, and then I mean, by the time Microsoft gets it fixed, well, on the MSIX or something else, right? And MSIX might help quite a bit too, but again, there's these gaps in technologies, and you take 4.6, which was an awesome version of AppV, but then now that's no longer supported, right? At some point in time during the history, but 5.0 and 5.1 just didn't cut the mustard. So what do, right? You have to solve the problem. You have to deal with the gap there, right? And now you've dealt with the gap, then what's the point of going back once the problem's fixed? Because you've already fixed the problem, because that gap, you already had to, you were forced to do something during that gap between those different versions. It's not just AppV. Other technologies have the same issue where they abandon a version or an idea before the replacement is fixed and ready to go.
right.
Right, and then there's that gap. It's like, what
Joe,
is
let
the
me
company
interrupt
supposed
a
to do in the
second.
meantime?
Yeah, sorry, there's a other thing. We don't see your camera, so I don't know if your camera's off. I thought we'd lose you just because you were showing a slide, but I think we should see your camera. And there may have been some confusion. This is really a discussion, and I think the cameras made it look like there was a presentation and someone else interrupting. But it is a discussion between Joe and I, but I don't think we're seeing Joe's camera. There we go. That's why it was confusing.
So I didn't shave today, so.
Okay. But yeah, I think the comment about AppV is a good one. Things come and go. They have different life cycles. Justin's commenting that it's still good and he's still using it. It's going to be around a while, and it certainly will for environments that depend on it. But it is one of the areas that it has shifted and changed over the years. How do you deploy images? How do you deploy apps? And that's kind of where we're going with this: is where is that today, and what's the mindset to approach today? All right, Joe, we got your camera, so let's keep going.
All right, so the question is, where do we go today? So my thought is, again, we kind of start coming back around to this automated build, right? So if we're having issues with being able to repackage apps, here's the other thing is, when you have a lot of applications and you have to repackage them in AppV or any other repackage them in AppLane and stuff, that's still time. That's still a lot of work that has to be done. And who wants to spend their time rebuilding and repackaging apps all the time when you can now, for a lot of these vendors, you can just go to the URL and grab the latest version and run the installation. So would you rather spend your time in trying to repackage apps, or building an automation framework that can go get an ever-ready version from a packaging system like NuGet or Chocolatey, right? That's the nice thing is, like, hey, I can install the latest version of Notepad++. I can install the latest version of .NET Framework. Just go to Chocolatey and just type in the command line, or I can use a framework like Ansible that can help me go from end to end and build that.
Hey, Joe, now, just want to, Joe, if I can pick up on that point, the idea of ever ready or evergreen really is a new concept. That's part of our newer age that we're talking about, kind of the age of DevOps and CI/CD, where you didn't really used to have the concept that you could just grab media from a place and it would be the latest and it would be through a feed. And that's one of the key concepts I think that's here today. You see it in so many different areas. And in many ways, enterprise computing is one of the last places to really get it, because it's been a mainstay of DevOps and web development and that kind of cloud building work. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's a really important concept.
Exactly, because I played around with Node.js and stuff as when Citrix bought OctaBlue. It was definitely a fun time and a fun era. And I got into a lot of that kind of development side of it to kind of play around with IoT and OctaBlue and building modules and stuff, and kind of understanding that world. Now, I don't necessarily consider myself a developer, but I gain some insights into that. And when you're building code or building applications, you're using a lot of modules and a lot of libraries. And we're not talking about a couple, we're talking about hundreds and thousands sometimes of each of these different modules might pull different things from another one. So when you do an NPM, you're pulling down packages, and then when you want to deploy something, you rerun it again, so it downloads all the updates. So not only you have just your code that's being updated, but all the binaries and the libraries that your application or node or whatever framework you're using is leveraging. There's all kinds of updates being applied to that. So the security, anywhere from new features to fixes to security updates. And so that let me table that for a second. So as we started getting back into this automation a year or two ago, I was trying to look at the different automation platforms and frameworks, and I was just doing some basic research. And I found a blog where a developer had talked about how he rebuilds his web service, a Linux-based web service, every night, and pushes. He has a script that compiles everything, puts it out, and then he rebuilds the website like literally every night. And at first, I thought it was like the stupidest idea in the world. And then as time went on, I kind of got used to the idea. It's like, okay, so he's trying to take advantage of all the different library updates, all the different security fixes, all the hot fixes, and trying to incorporate that. Then he can rebuild an image, have it go through a test process, and push out. And he's been able to do that on a daily basis. And I was kind of thinking, well, how can we take that idea, that approach? And again, I'm not the first one by any means. There are other people who have been doing this long before, taking this approach of using CI/CD pipelining to build the master images. But I came somewhere in the middle there. But just taking that idea, it's like, well, what makes sense? And we don't necessarily need to rebuild our master image every night, but a month could be too long. So we start thinking like, well, okay, we start looking at all these Evergreen or ever-ready applications that are constantly being updated. And if you're not on the right version of something, it ruins it for everybody else, especially when you're doing some kind of shared hosted multi-user operating system, right? Sometimes you have to do a machine install, and it affects everybody on the machine. And if one person's agent does the math with that said, and everything kind of blows up, and you end up with all kinds of weird issues. So
well, I
taking
think
that idea.
Sorry, this is the mindset that's really important, because my experience of that was working on DR type work, and someone described an environment they were working on where the DR was in data center 1, the production was in data center 1, and they would fail it as a matter of course to data center 2 once a month, and then run for a month, and then fail back to data center 1. Right. So this was my moment that, like you're describing, when you heard about the guy who rebuilds his servers every night. Mine was moving your data center every month. And coming from enterprise, you get so sort of forced and trained, especially in the older days, it's not as much today, that you have to lock down, that you have to come to a working known good version and lock it. And many of our clients, especially in critical industries, actually have lockdown period. You can develop the system during these months, and now it must lock down, sometimes for extended periods of time. It might be in retail, like Christmas season, for example. So we come at this from many years of, kind of being encouraged and forced to get this mentality of find a good working version and run it and milk it as long as you can. It's the stories of critical enterprise systems running on platforms that haven't even been supported in years and years, right? So I'm glad you brought up that example, because as the world shifts, it challenges you to think a little differently. And these kind of were moments Joe and I had where we went like, wow, why can't you do it more dynamically? We might go, oh, we know those web guys can, it's just a website. But how about enterprise computing, right?
Exactly. and it's still a little bit of a challenge because there's still problems that still need to be solved in order to do some of this. Is we go back to that question about trusting your script or trusting your automation, and this is where you have to be able to do both some kind of versioning control for your application, but also allow flexibility for those ever-ready applications, evergreen applications that have to be updated in order for them to function correctly. And so, how do you mix the two? It's going to be a little bit different for each organization. But if we kind of start going back to the old school stuff again, where we went through the process of development, we build a new image and start tinkering around with it. Then we send it to the admin team to start playing around and testing it. Then we would send it to UAT and get some users to try to log into it if we could. That's kind of always been a challenge of getting users to test stuff. And then we would take that image and throw it into QA and bleed that in and canary it into the production environment. And as the last step, if there's no issues found during those stages, then we promote that image into the production environment. So we can kind of do the same thing with an automated, kind of a CI/CD pipelining methodology where we have it build an image on a schedule, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and we could take that image that was built, deploy that out to an administrative group to at least get the initial application validated and tested. It could even be the business owners for those applications that the critical applications can be part of that as well. And then we just automatically move that after a week or so of that, we move that into an early adopters phase, right? And so those early adopters, again, kind of analogous to UAT users, except they're always using the UAT environment. They're not using this production, and then you go ask them to go test this off to the side, which they never do, and they tell you they do, and it doesn't. And they say, oh, looks great, and then you go to the next phase, and then it all falls flat, right? We've all kind of been there before, where you're not getting the right feedback from the users, or the users are not doing their part of it. If you have this kind of early adopters phase, then you're forcing the user to actually use this image. And after a set amount of time, that could automatically move into your mainstream adopters. And then so the majority of the organization is now kind of running on this image. And, after a set period of time, you can go to your late adopters, to your more critical workloads, the ones where you need to have this stuff up and running and needs to work. And hopefully, by the time you get to that late adopters phase, you have found or able to, or even just put the brakes on that image moving or migrating to that level. And so you could put the brakes on any time. You could redo something, or you could say, oh, I need to investigate this. This is not working. This is not integrating right. And so somewhere along the chain, you'll be able to identify issues that crop up and then deal with them more now than, again, trying to push that down the line. Because that's the old school mentality, is when we have an issue, we don't have the time to fix it right now. We'll put it off. And then, several months later, you might come back around, and then you don't even remember what the problem is anymore at that point. And, you trying to do an image update, and then you run into it again, and you just never solve the problem.
Hey, Joe, that's great. Let me bring up a couple of phrases and concepts that are being talked about. One is the idea of evergreen. Andre was asking about, is that a product or what is that? And I'm just describing it's really like an approach, that the software is always the newest. It can be updated in place automatically from like a centralized repository. Citrix Cloud as a control plane is a good example of that. Citrix will update your control plane roles automatically on premises. They won't update your VDA with your image content, but they'll update the controllers. So that would be an example of evergreen. But the other concept I wanted to throw in, Joe, we also call it canary, and canary in a coal mine. As you described, the modern way to think, where you've got testing, early adopters, mainstream, late adopters, almost like the internet itself. Canary comes from putting a canary in a coal mine to see if it dies. If it dies, there's gas there that would kill a person, but a canary dies first. So we call it in our practice as we work with clients, the canary method is shorthand for you give it to a small number of users first and you see what happens. And this is largely because we don't necessarily get thorough testing with the old enterprise, Warhammer method, POC, pilot, U-test. We can, but not always. So by introducing it to a small number of users in a controlled fashion, you can really watch what happens. And the cool thing is if you can get into the organization and befriend people, there's always a group of people who want to be that. They want to be the leading edge. They want to get the latest, greatest. And you often can find a group of people that are willing to be that so that they're always on the latest. And then they give you the feedback. So I just wanted to interject that, Joe. There's some good discussion about it. And some of these phrases I think are good to know, like evergreen or canary in a coal mine. There's a couple other points you have on the notes, Joe, but I want to jump to this. There's an interesting discussion about languages and a comment from Jim Moyle. So let me tell you both. The comment is, or a question is, do you see a trend away from PowerShell towards languages like Python as folks use more general purpose tools for CI/CD and other DevOps practice? And then Jim made a comment, language is unimportant. Whether it's PowerShell or Python, all CI/CD tools are a polyglot. Use whatever you have the skills in. And I think that is a change of mindset. Do you want to talk about the Joe, languages and scripting?
Yeah, I think what Jim said is absolutely on point, and it's kind of been my concern. And you and I have talked about this and had many discussions on this. And when we were kind of going through and looking at different frameworks, right? You've got things like Terraform and Packer can do OS and infrastructure stuff. You've got Ansible, which is more procedural. And we kind of stuck with Ansible. The thing, and it's a great tool. It's a little frustrating at first to get started with because you don't know what you don't know. And it's the formatting of it does matter to some extent. And but once you get it, and once you get the hang of it, Ansible is a really great tool, especially not just for Linux and infrastructure bits, but also for just managing Windows. There's a ton of libraries and modules specified just for Windows. But the drawback of that is that a lot of that stuff is Linux based, right? So you need to have a little bit of Linux skills in order to install and set up an Ansible environment. It's really not that hard, but if you're a Windows admin or you're Windows IT kind of focused on Windows OS primarily, it's a hard shift, right? To start thinking about doing things in other tools and other libraries and other modules, other software on a different OS of all things, right? So with your Windows, you used to use command line, and in old days it was VBScript and PowerShell. But if you look at Ansible, it's using Python and it's using PowerShell for both. The Python bits are on the Ansible side, and when it's connecting to SSH or WinRM, it's running PowerShell scripts on the Windows side of it. So I think as we start looking into this, we kind of need to break down the barriers of, it's got to be a Windows-based solution. It's got to be MDT or something like that because it's Windows-based. We start looking at cloud. The cloud doesn't care. I mean, your EndOS, that your virtual machine up there might be Windows, but you're not. More than likely, you're not talking to a Windows machine. You're talking to a set of APIs, whether that's through PowerShell or through Mac or through Python or whatever language that you're using, or even the framework. It doesn't matter. They're just APIs at this point.
That's great, Joe. Yeah, I want to take a comment here from David talking about early adopters. The idea of early adopters is great, but users can get very frustrated if they get hit with issues a few times in a row. How would you approach this problem? And I replied in the chat, but I wanted to bring up because I think it's so key. is this maybe isn't the first inclination as a technical IT guy, but it's relationships. And I don't know if you're a consultant or a staff person, but either way, as unintuitive as it may sound, of getting out and meeting people and identifying the champions, because they're always there. I work as a consultant, so I'm in different organizations all the time. I can always find people who are the excited ones, who like to help, who want to get the beta, who think, feel special because they're like getting on board ahead of time. So that is a human thing. And it's very important, especially when you go to these approaches, that there be human contact. It's counterintuitive because we're talking about automating, but people have to use it and adopt it and like it. And that early, what we call canary in a coal mine feedback, is really the critical stage. Usually that's where you're going to find the big problems. One other point about that is, just as an aside, is the way I've been successful with that, learning the hard way, is really it's a relationship and discussion with people, and it often isn't talking to them about technical stuff. It's really just kind of connecting, and then in a roundabout way asking about, like, what are the key job things you do, what matters most, and you actually document, if they don't already, the matrix or the script of the things that they have to do successfully for it to work. So when you're pushing out a new version, it should be an understanding. Here's the validation matrix. Here's the things that have to work. It might be the TPS report on Monday, or I have to be able to download this PDF and do something with it and send it through to another department. You got to understand the actual tasks they're doing. I'm talking kind of enterprise environment, not necessarily web-based. That's a little different. So I wanted to add that. That's great feedback. Okay, and Chris Radke is saying, Steve, get out and meet your users and people. Exactly. Can't emphasize this enough. I learned this the hard way over many years, and even developed a methodology we've shared at some of the public conferences. We call it how to become an end user secret agent. And that's a way to go talk to people that isn't natural to IT, to just connect with them, make that relationship, and kind of learn the things that they need to do. So great points. Thanks for all the excellent feedback. We're coming up on about 50 minutes. Joe, that was an awesome discussion. I think one thing I just want to say was this was intended to be a little funny on April 1st, to go back to 2007, when we basically gave the same presentation, but that there are a lot of changes and the important automation, and to kind of just discuss the concept now. But with the remainder of the time, and we can stay longer if people want to, we can go a little deeper and talk about, actually more of the hands-on stuff. Joe is truly an expert at all the different types of scripting and coding and frameworks. And one project we've done recently, that Joe masterminded, is a company that has data centers around the country. There's 5 different data centers that, for very good business functional reasons, kind of stand alone. They're one company, one Active Directory, but the nature of their business requires that things be able to run offline if necessary. And so this kind of framework that Joe's describing, the DevOps CI/CD approach, was used to create an Ansible launched framework that was a lot of PowerShell and other things to update each of these data centers on its own to the newest LTSR version of Citrix CVAD, and to do all the necessary changes and so forth in the process, validate it, and to make it so that the company can do these data centers one at a time with the same exact method. And it uses all the characteristics that Joe is describing with repository and, bringing in apps and so forth. So I just wanted to kind of go from the conceptual discussion to say that we're talking about very, very practical stuff, real projects, real environments, and maybe we can shift that discussion more to that. And Joe, anything you want to add to that discussion, maybe that example of the multi-data centers and what you did to automate updating them?
So each of the data centers kind of need to be the same, but they also need to be very independent of each other. The challenge is when you're building stuff by hand and you're building stuff, rebuilding stuff over time, because we can't just do all 5 data centers at once. They have to be done on a very time and a very small change window. But we only get like 2 to 4 hours at best to do all the upgrades. And so we have to have all our ducks and stuff in a row. And if anything goes wrong, we want to also have the ability to roll back to 7.15 if we needed to. So that's also a very critical bit there. But if we can automate as much as we can squeeze all that stuff into a smaller change window, which is what the business unit in each of those locations want. They don't want downtime. They need to be running 24/7. And so any downtime is frowned upon, right? But in IT, we have to have some downtime to be able to do maintenance and upgrades and stuff like that. So with that, with them, we go ahead.
One thing that you brought up in the discussion from the old days that we had problems with was server drift, right? That configurations would change. And in this case, there's multiple data centers, so we could have data center drift, right? Where one data center is kind of done this way. They did their boot image slightly different than the other. They built their image a little bit different ways. And this also brings that consistency even across data centers.
Correct, because those things did happen. So how do we shore up and mitigate some of those issues, right? And automation's one way. And when we think about automation, when we're rebuilding stuff, we build getting that mindset where we can rebuild a controller, we can rebuild storefront, because the value isn't in the build of the delivery controller. All that value is in the SQL server, right? The database, the actual data is where the value is. I can rebuild storefront servers left and right, put them in and out of a load balancer, different server groups and stuff. We can rebuild as we need. If we have, some issues with something, it's easy to rebuild something and re-add it back in. Again, the value is in that data that's stored.
Hey Joe, let me make a concept. There's a comment. There's certain concepts that are popping out that I want to emphasize. One of them is a big one that you just hit on, which is back in the day when we were building servers by hand and tattooing registry settings and doing all this crazy stuff to make things work. The install mattered. Like, what you did during install and the things you applied. It was a different concept. Now you're describing the modern thing where really installation is somewhat trivial. It's something that's just generic, and then what matters is the configuration that you apply. The settings, the security posture, policies. That's where the magic occurs, and that has shifted. It used to be the craftsman building the server and carving, registry settings and making a recipe, and now that's kind of trivial, and the money is in the configuration. So I wanted to point that concept out too.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And that's kind of why we kind of move into these different approaches of being able to, we could do in-place upgrades, but there can be some complications with that. For the most part, a lot of the in-place upgrades work really well today, but if you can build things still in parallel, which is kind of what we did in the old days, why can't we, if we automate things, we could still do things in parallel, and it'll give us more of an instant rollback than trying to do in-place upgrades. Again, the gap between the two has really shrunk to where there really isn't much of a gap anymore, but that's not really the point. One of the things I wanted to mention here is on the slide is I did create a lot of what I call Ansible roles for installing CVAD-related products. You install the delivery controller, storefront, session recording agent, the VDAs, web agent, PVS agent, PVS server, those kind of things. And I do have them up on the Ansible Galaxy role. So if you're familiar with Ansible, you can use the Ansible Galaxy to install these particular roles, the CVAD Web and PVS. PVS I threw up there this morning. I don't have the documentation done for it, so I was kind of debating whether to put it up there. But if you're familiar with the CVAD and the WEM and how to work some of those playbooks, then the PVS is not far off. And the PVS one, I don't say this, but there's a couple. I don't have the playbooks for it there, but there are a couple roles that will allow you to take an image capture. So once you get everything installed, you go through the master image playbook, you can add to where it will automatically create a PVS image, upload it to the PVS server, and then another role that will actually take that image and then assign it to a catalog. So if you were interested in doing kind of an automated build over time, like a set scheduled build where you move an image from one stage to the next, however you want to call it, you can use those two roles to not only build the image and then get the image up there, but then the second role will help you assign that image to the whatever state catalog that's associated to the stage that you want an image to be associated with. So if you're moving it, you could just move it from stage to stage and then take your PVS image and then move it into the new test dev or new early adopters stage or something like that.
Hey, Joe,
email.
Let me interject here because we had a question earlier I wanted to come back to, and this is the perfect time. Justin Anderson had said, what are your best suggestions for separating applications from the build to get one gold image? Specific products would be great to hear about. And we used to talk about this in terms of things like MCS, PVS, AppV. But in this world, how do you think about the apps and an image and a gold image, how that is built in this new approach?
Are you talking about like in the AppV days where we separate the apps from the OS?
Well, I'm referring to, he's asking for like, what are your suggestions for doing this today?
I don't think you need to really abstract the application from the OS. If you have a scripted installation, you can just script it from the OS all the way up to the PVS image in one basically one playbook if you wanted to, just get it all done. It could be for Windows 10, it could be for Windows 2019, it could be for Windows 2022. If you're playing around with that, you're not limited to an OS. You don't need to abstract the applications, and in fact, the application can even make any OS specific modifications that it sees, right? So if it has something to say, hey, I'm running this on a server, I need to make these particular changes, or on Windows 10, I need to do this, the application installer now has the ability to make those particular modifications. And
so that's important. Let me tell you, that's an important statement here, because this is an important statement, because if you had attended any number of these Briforum sessions we did for years and Synergy sessions, you may have heard a very different story, right? At one point, you may have heard the necessity of abstracting applications from the gold image, right, and why that was so important. So I was trying to get down to that one image
goal, right? And the question is why? Hey, we're trying to get down to a single image to manage, which is great and doable. It's like the AppV ages, we were able to do that really well. It just required a lot of repackaging of AppV apps every time there was an update to a particular application. And then there was compatibility issues, right? So that was the whole reason for using AppV, is we could abstract that from many other applications, so we didn't have conflict, we didn't have DLL conflict, we didn't have an I and I fighting over each other and stuff like that. Well, nowadays applications aren't as terrible as they used to be. I mean, there's still some issues with deploying apps, especially when you get into user-based applications, installed applications. It's a whole different realm, but you don't have the compatibility issues you once had. You still have some tools to mitigate that. That doesn't require an entire isolated environment to do that, like AppV, to put something in a bubble. And then from a security or just a management perspective, you can do things like app masking to hide a lot of things, or even use app masking to help mitigate some of those compatibility issues, right? So FS Logic not only has the ability just to hide things, but it also can redirect things. And so if you are dealing with DLL hell or dealing with I&I conflicts or registries bumping into each other, users bumping into the same registry settings, then that tool can still have a play in this.
Hey, Joe, that's awesome. I got to interrupt for 1 second just to capture the greatest quote so far of 2021 is that applications are not as terrible as they used to be. We need to put that on a plaque for Joe and label it 2021. That's a pretty big deal. The other is that we're up on the hour, and Joe and I can stay and talk, but I wanted to just acknowledge that it's just after the hour, and I know people's time is valuable. If you have other things you need to do, we understand, but we're
We have
welcome
some
to.
giveaways too.
What's that? Oh
And it's
yeah, we
also
got.
some giveaways too.
Well, let's have Stephanie come back in and do her magic, and we're happy to keep going if you guys still want to talk.
Hi.
Hey.
So I will let's see, I have one question for you. Let's see, I'll just grab the screen really quickly because I know as soon as I put it up, you guys are going to put your answers in. So the first three people to answer this question correctly, hold on. Hold on, show PowerPoint. Okay. And now you just see a white screen. See how tricky it is? April Fools from GoToWebinar. It's start and stop. It's
We'll get
always
it. Get it.
still no. Okay, well, I may just read the question if GoTo will not cooperate. Oh, there it is. Yay. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
All right, so I was going to ask the other question about what city and state or city and event, but I think there were too many people who knew.
Well, and also,
So,
you know, you're paying attention, so I like that. It's, you know, you're listening and paying attention here.
okay, let's see. I'll make sure I have the right answer that Joe gave me because he told me I was going to see I see some people trying a few things.
They're
Okay.
throwing it in there. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Okay, so the first one I see that is right. Okay, Serge, I'm gonna hope I'm saying that correctly. Serge Gusakov, congratulations. Um,
Got a
number
Brian Breshanhan.
Brian
We definitely got Richie.
Bresnahan.
I don't know who did it first.
And I got a Richie Dietzman. Hey, Richie, how you doing? Long time no see.
Yeah. I like
So
Paul.
I
Typos
did
galore.
it too. I always say deployment, but it's actually delivery. So a lot of people say continuous integration, continuous deployment. It's actually continuous delivery. So that is the correct answer.
All right, so the first people to get that exactly right were Serge, Richard Dietzman, and actually Charlie Ting, unless you told me that can the development qualify because you said Brian. Does that one?
Yeah, Brian. No, he said
No.
development. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
he's
So
wrong.
Charlie
Sorry.
Ting.
You're
All
right.
right. Those are my winners.
All
All right,
right.
guys. I will reach out to you after this, and you'll have your choice of swag from the CUGC store. All right. I
Awesome.
will put Joe. I'll give the screen back to you so you can put your slide back up there. I know you had some resources on it, so I'll give it back to you. And I know if anybody can stick around for more questions. Uh-oh, there we go.
Yeah, we can go another 10, 15 minutes on this.
Okay.
So if anybody's got any specific questions they want to ask, I'll let Steve be the question picker.
Okay.
He always finds a good one to ask.
And I guess I'll ask you a question, Joe, in the meantime. How do you personally like this change? You've been doing this a long time. The story is that Joe and I met in like 2003 or so. There was a mini recession. We didn't really get to work together. And then I had a large project where I needed help on and asked him to come on for 3 months in 2004. And we're still working together every day since then.
17 years later for a 3-month project.
Yeah,
Huh?
and that was first generation. I've been doing this stuff since like WinView and 90s and OS2 and Novell and crap. But I'm just going to ask you a question, Joe, while we see if people want to hang out and ask other things. How do you personally like this change? you've been through many different kinds of technology. You have a background in, Joe has actually got a degree in, computer science and coding and so forth. But now you're in like a whole new phase, and it's a lot more codey than it used to be. What do you think about this approach?
It's fine by me. I have no problem with coding things. I mean, I do remember in classes trying to teach uh, other students how to actually code, and looking at their code was atrocious. Nobody could really follow the logic properly. But like I said, every admin should at least learn how to script, even if it's not great. At least you started somewhere, and you'll get better over time. You'll find better ways of doing it. Back in when I went to college, we didn't really have Google. Google didn't exist yet, unfortunately. So you couldn't Google things. Now you have a plethora of not only online courses, but just Google. You could Google something. It's like, how do I do this in PowerShell? How do I do this in Python? How do I do this in Perl? I mean, you can just literally Google and find a lot of different hits that you can go through and see, okay, this does what I want, this doesn't, oh, this does exactly what I want it to do. And you can literally just copy and paste and play with that code and make it work for your environment. In a test lab, obviously, you want to isolate your changes, make sure things are going to work before you ever get into you doing anything like this against a production environment. You always want to have some way of testing not
That's
only your code, but the changes
Joe,
that you're
there's an
making.
interesting dichotomy there of you're kind of asked to be more self-reliant and automate and script and code, but you also have way more resources available to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's
And
not
these
all.
tools, like Ansible's free. I mean, it's owned by Red Hat, but it's open source. At least if you want to pay for support, or you want us to pay for the additional features, you can, but you're not obligated to. Same thing with Packer from HashiCorp or Terraform. The products are open source and they're free to use. You just have to go out and learn how to use them, right?
Awesome.
And then if you do want to put this into a production environment, you may want the additional support if it's going to integrate into something that is critical to that environment. And building things isn't necessarily that critical, but you could also leverage this to build out playbooks that or runtime, you take your runtime processes and automate them. One of the things that we've been looking at doing is for the DR failover, right? So we have multiple data centers and you're trying to do a DR failover. What bits and pieces can be automated to save you time in having a failover from data center A to data center B? And you don't necessarily have the time to say, I got to do this server and then I got to do this one. And then once that SQL server is done, then I can do this one. And then you're having to do this stuff manually, fail over the stuff manually. If you can't already have it, a resource, a like resource in the other data center, then maybe you want to script bits and pieces of it. Maybe you want to have a multiple data center and you want to automate that PVS image. So once it's gone to a certain stage, it gets replicated over to your DR site and automatically put in the PVS, and those VDAs that are attached to it automatically restarted and using that VDA. So when you do need to fail over to the other data center, they're all ready to go. You didn't have to do anything, right, except flip the switch.
It's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. We do have some other questions. Excuse me. It looks like Andre's already got your Ansible modules. He said, Joe, very nice repo for Ansible. Thank you. Do you plan to add Citrix Cloud?
Probably at some point. It's just a matter of one of the things that we're trying or wanting to do is be able to go out and have some of these binaries that we can just download and install instead of having them put behind a paywall. And so it's kind of the challenge now when I say paywall, I mean you have some kind of credentials Not necessarily have to pay to get the binaries, but you have some kind of credential or login or process where you have to actually log in and grab it. There are ways to around that, or ways to work that into a framework. But I would much prefer that we can just like, oh, this is the latest version of the Cloud Connector. Let me download it and install it. There are some integration bits, right? So once you download and install that Cloud Connector, you still have to log in to your cloud instance, your cloud tenant. And if you have multiple tenants, right? Like if you're a contractor or a reseller or a consultant, you're probably managing multiple customer tenants. So, you got to make sure everything aligns right. So the first goal was to get on-prem working, on the on-premises stuff working, and then we can add it if people really want an Ansible module for Citrix Cloud stuff, then I can definitely write one. It shouldn't be difficult at that point.
But you're saying the hesitation was to get it working with on-prem first, but also to get the source media for things, you're saying you have to log in and there's some contingencies, right?
Correct. And then you download it, and then you got to log in again in order to complete the configuration. And so I haven't really looked into how much of that can be automated and done through a command line, and it's probably possible to do that. I just haven't gone through the exercise. And the reason we did on-prem first versus cloud first, which it seems like counterintuitive with every other software vendor out there, is because we have projects that we're doing on-prem. And so we want to get the stuff working on-prem first, and then we consider some of the cloud customers that want to do it.
Excellent. And then Michael Russell has a great question, which is perfect as we're coming kind of near the end to bring this up. He said, can you talk about the validation piece post upgrade? Are you using synthetics from, say, control up and load testing from, say, login VSI before bringing on actual users?
That's a good question. In the old days, it was, build a script and just make sure stuff was installed and all the bits and pieces were in the right location. The more modern way would be to do some kind of synthetic login. But that's going to require a lot of work and a lot of customization that's going to be specific to the organization to go and launch, line of business application, have a synthetic login to that, and then, navigate and be able to say, because this screen came up, it's okay, right? So what constitutes as it's working or works well enough, right?
That's right.
Is it at launch? Can you log in? Can you bring up a screen, a specific screen? So that there's some tools out there that like Automate or Automai that can help you do that. AutoIt, right? That you can build some of this stuff there, but you just have to go through that exercise and build it for each one of those applications that you really care about. If you try to do it for hundreds of applications, by the time you get done with the last one, the first set is going to be irrelevant. It's going to have to be redone again because, things change, right? Interfaces changes, GUI changes, the application changes, new features, those kind of things. Like, it's tough, right? That's why when in the beginning you may just be doing manual testing, where once you've got stuff built, you have to log in, make sure the applications work, give it to the business application owners and have them test, make sure that it works. Then you can move that image to the next stage. It may have to be a manual process until you can figure out how to do it, automate.
Okay, and then I would also comment that people always make fun of consultants and they always say it depends, but we do work with different clients all the time, so each one's going to be a little bit different. But a kind of a standard way we're doing it now is the automation is validated through all the kinds of things Joe's does to make sure, like he said, all the right apps and binaries and configurations are there. That is checked automatic. The ability to log in and be available is automatic, but we do still come back to that canary in a coal mine and the early adopters have to test it, because the classic gap is that IT says, well, the thing launches and I can log in, but then the user says, yeah, but I have to go to the reporting module and it has a dependency and I'm trying to run the TPS report. And then every time it does, it says I get an ODBC error, right? So there's a functional level of things that's beyond whether it's available. So not giving you a great direct answer, Michael, but the short answer is yes, you do want to automate the validation and testing. But if something's truly usable, like at a kind of an enterprise level, it's probably going to require the user exercising their stuff. And that's what we call the validation matrix, is learning what are the key. It's usually not a lot. It's usually 8 or 10 things they have to be able to do, to say this works and to know what those are. And that may come back still to people. One other thing I'll add is after the systems are up and running, we do have some of the very tools you're mentioning running. We do have synthetic logins going, like before the shifts start. There are synthetic logins running. Can people log in and reporting back? And there's monitoring and reporting. But that gray zone in between, we'll call it like the canaries, that usually has to be people. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, for the most part, because it's just too much. If you had a handful of apps, it's very doable. When you have 400 applications and different variants of those applications, then it becomes very difficult. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes one app, you may have 5 different variants for that app, different entry points, different databases, different configurations depending on location, data center, end user, those kind of things. So you have to, how do you account for all of that?
Exactly. Great.
I don't think anybody wants to make it a full-time job to try to script to that level.
Great. And Michael said, thanks for the explanation. I'm just going to reply, hope we didn't confuse you more.
Well, I have a tendency of confusing people sometimes.
This whole it depends
I confuse
thing
myself.
is very real. It's very real. Like every situation is a little different. And here we are showing you, we're joking on April 1st that it's 2007, but we've been doing it literally every day since then. And it just keeps changing, and it just keeps depending on what is Windows doing today, what is the cloud doing today, what are your apps doing, what does the organization need. So you have to have kind of like, I would say we're focusing on the technology, but I would say the biggest innovation, and I'm just riffing this, Joe, so listen and give me your response to this. The biggest innovation is changing your brain so that it accepts a mindset of constant change and doesn't get reactive. Like I used to really love the way we would do Windows and AppV and layer it and on-demand assembly. And I think at some point we had kind of a sweet spot where we could build these environments and they were just freaking awesome. But then components change, Windows changed, the cloud came, and you have to let go and say, well, that was then, and like sort of not care and almost just take it with excitement. Like, okay, there's a new way of doing it. There's a new wrinkle. There's a new best practice, and just let go and test it, and just always focus on what gives you the best outcome. And it doesn't really matter how you feel about it or what you used to do, or you're an AppV guy, right? It just keeps changing. What do you think about that, Joe? Am I just making stuff up?
No, I think you're on point. I agree with you. I mean, look at me, I'm excited.
Okay, yay, that's a smile. All right,
So,
well, we've had some fantastic interaction. I think we're coming to the end here. Let me see if, okay, this is good. Maybe we'll give Pat Patterson the last word. I really like this. Difficult is good. If it was easy, anyone could do it, and we'd all be paid 10K a year.
well, somebody would automate us to do it.
Well, if it was easy, it's like flipping burgers, anyone can do it. So I'm going to give Pat the last word. Joe, this was phenomenal. Thanks for sharing all your experience and insight. And we did this as kind of a discussion and trying to give you an overview and sort of give you a mindset of these tools, but if people are interested, we could probably do one which is a little bit more like actually demonstrating, automation and approaches like that. But we did want to kind of give the overview of why and how. So I hope that was helpful. We're getting yeses in the comments for demo, so maybe Stephanie will book another one, and we'll do it more of a like actually showing the framework in operation.
We can do that. Hey, Stephanie, is there still a April 22nd automation?
Yeah, the next CUGC Geek Speak, so you can comment to panel discussions. You can ask any question that you want about automation. It'll be another discussion like this with more geeks.
More geeky, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to that calendar, the CUGC events calendar, I think I put the link in a while back, but everything's out there, so you can definitely find it there.
And I will be at that one as well.
That's right.
Along with a few other pews for that one. That should be an exciting one as well. So if you're still interested in automation after this particular session, I definitely encourage you guys to join that one as well, because it is becoming a hot topic. And I'm surprised it's taken this long to become a hot topic, but I'm glad it is becoming a hot topic, because it's something that's kind of been neglected for some time, and it's due to come back around the technology cycle.
Very good.
Right, well, thank you guys so much. Thanks for doing this today, and sounds like I've got another webinar to schedule with you. So we'll get out the calendar. And thanks to all of you for attending. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good one. Thank you.